Welcome to the Bold Strokes Books Bookathon. Glad to have y'all here. Hope you're staying safe and well, and thanks for joining us today. Just a couple of quick tips before I hand this over to our moderator, Sandy Lowe. If you want to reach up to the right-hand side of your screen at the very top and click into gallery view, you'll be able to see everyone at once on your screen. If you have questions during the panel, Sandy will be watching out for those. Just type them in your Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. You can click on that and a box will pop up for you. Also, click on your chat box. A box will appear to your right and you can type in comments, compliments. Watch that space for sale later on in the panel. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sandy Lowe for The Heat is On.
Thanks, Carson. So I have a little bit of sway with Bold Strokes Books, and I got to pick my own panel. Of course, I chose The Heat is On sexy panel. Thank you so much for all of you being here. This is the third panel today, and we had a bunch yesterday, and we just so appreciate all our readers who have taken time out of their weekend and their week to join us. We love you guys. All right, so this panel is all about sex, and we have some amazing writers here to help us discuss. So I'm going to get you to introduce yourselves and answer the question, what appeals to you about writing sex? Why don't you start, Kris? Kris, we can't hear you. Do you want to check your audio for me?
Let me see what I'm going.
There we go. Perfect.
Oh, hi. Sorry about that. What appeals to me about writing sex? I love the vulnerability of it. I love that it's overwhelming. I love writing the whole, like the first time, even the last time somebody has sex. I just like the emotions of it. I like the physicalness of it. I like the emotions of it. And I try to do the best I can to cover both, because both are very important.
Anne, what about you?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I guess just being able to bring that to life in someone's imagination, having them, bringing the words to life, having them picture the scene out as if it's playing a movie in their head. It's more challenging than just writing a general storyline because it has to be believable. So I think the challenge of it is what appeals to me.
Good answer. Victoria?
I like the rawness of it. I like the let all boundaries and inhibitions go and just dive into each other kind of moment where the whole world doesn't exist. It's just you and the other body. Well, not you, perhaps, but the other character. I won't get personal here, but just meeting up and crashing together. I love that.
Meghan O'Brien, who has possibly written the most sex of anybody on this panel. What appeals to you about writing sex?
Well, really, it's because I love writing passion and angst and character growth, and I think sex scenes are pretty much the best conduit for those types of things. I don't know, it's like everyone else has said, it's very raw, it's very vulnerable, and a lot of stuff can happen in those types of scenes.
And Nan, what about you?
I like the research.
Yeah, I'm there.
No, I think writing about sex is honesty. You can't lie when you're writing. It has to be the truth right out there.
Great. Okay, just to give folks a little bit more idea about what you write, what kind of sex scenes you write, why don't you give a brief mention of your book that you think has the sexiest sex scene and why you think it's sexy. So we'll start with Bryant again.
Oh my gosh. Well, book-wise, that's tough. You know, I wrote the novella Shameless under Britt Ryder, and that's probably the sexiest thing I've written. Just the scene in the whole buildup and the sexuality of the scene at the museum. It's kind of sexy, like Vic was saying. It's very raw. It's kind of two people getting together in a kind of a lustful situation where there's absolutely nothing between them. There's nothing there. It's strictly sex. It's and I think that's probably the rawest I've ever been on the page, at least.
That's a hot one, guys. Pick that one up. What about you, Meghan?
I think, I guess, In the Night Off, which totally was like very terrible to edit because I started to read it. I'm like, oh my God, what have I done? I can't believe I'm gonna let people read this. But I think the scene where they transition from this is a business transaction to all of the emotions that are building up during the initial sex scene, and and finally the one character uses a safe word with the other, and it takes them from sex to emotion. To me, that was very hot. I don't know. I like a lot of emotional angst sort of interspersed, or emotional growth. So yeah, that makes it hotter.
I agree. Nan?
Well, the hottest one I think is coming up in June on Arrested Pleasures. The sex scene there with the two women, they start out very BDSM, start out being bondage and all sorts of things. And finally, they're honest with each other and say, I love you. And it then gets a little vanilla and very sweet.
Oh, a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anne, what about you? Your favorite sex scene in a book?
I guess in my current one, Femme Tales. And it would be the first novella in the book between the character known as Beast and her love interest Belinda. So it's based on Beauty and the Beast. And it's very, very just like a clash of wills. So they're both controlling people. And so, but now Beast is like having to learn how to kind of let go, but not quite yet. So she takes control of the situation. It becomes a very intense and hot sex scene. I guess that one is nice.
And Victoria, you write also under another name, like Kris does. So what's your favorite sex scene in a book that you've written as Bray Willis?
I think the most fun I had was probably with the Furies books, because you're writing creatures with wings and fangs, and so that was just fun to play with, because it was so kind of surreal, and to think like, where do bits and pieces fit when you've got these ginormous wings? So I think probably just in Furies Bridge, and starting with that, it was probably the most fun.
Okie dokie. So here's a good one for you guys. What do you think are essential elements of a good sex scene? And let's start with Anne. And I'm also just glancing over to our chat roll. There's a couple of people who are having trouble hearing you, Anne. I don't know if there's any way to bring your microphone a little bit closer when you answer. Maybe that will help. I can hear you just fine, so I'm not sure. Everyone?
Better?
Yeah, let's try that.
All right. I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question?
Elements of a good sex scene.
Elements of a sex scene, I would say the first would be realism. It has to be realistic. There is the, I'll say, straight male version of lesbian sex and the real version.
Yeah.
The other version, you have to be an acrobat in order to complete some of the positions that I guess these people have of lesbian sex. And then there's the raw one, the real one, the one where there's going to be a hand placed someplace that, isn't quite right. It's not going to be, nothing's going to be perfect. So realism. The next one would be heat. That's important. If it's not a hot sex scene, that's you're not going to hold anyone's attention. And then the last one, I think, is wording. For instance, saying that I have one written down as an example. So, the example I have is saying, for instance, the tip of, Ebony ran her tongue along Belinda's vagina and stuck it in. That doesn't give you anything. Doesn't help with the imagination. Another version would be the tip of Ebony's tongue slowly teased along and dipped into Belinda's slick opening. That's a big difference in wording. So I think wording, heat, and realism are important elements for me.
So many good answers. What about you, Kris? Elements of a good sex scene.
Elements of a good sex scene. I need to feel it. I need to be in the moment. I need to have a physical reaction to it. Like my heart beats faster, you know, my palms get sweaty. Can I feel what my characters are feeling in the moment? I think every time I read a book, even when I was younger, I always liked when I got to the scene, the special magical scene, because then I could feel it and I would get excited and I could feel everything. My body gets flush. And so I like to write things that will give the readers the same reaction, the reaction that I want. I want them to feel it physically and to feel it emotionally inside and throughout, I guess. I think that's an important element to writing erotica or romance or love or sex scene or anything. It's probably the most important for me.
What about you, Meghan? Jump in with something that hasn't been mentioned. I feel like the list is shortening. So many good answers.
Yeah, there's been a lot of good answers. For me personally, dialogue. I like sex scenes with a lot of communication between the characters. I have very few scenes where it's all physical. I like when there's emotional tension of some kind that's kind of underlying the sex that's happening. That makes it a lot more potent and fraught, I guess. And I also like when sex scenes have a legitimate reason to exist, which may sound crazy because I write a lot of sex scenes and maybe some of them don't have a legitimate reason to exist, but I would like to think that in any sex scene you're advancing the relationship or the characters in some way, and I think that makes it more exciting to read them.
It's true. What about you, Victoria?
I think everything that everybody else has said, emotional connection I think is huge, and as Meghan was just saying about it being necessary and advancing the plot kind of as well, so that you're not just writing nothing but kind of mechanics, that it's about the emotional connections as well.
Yeah. And Nan?
I think all of that, but the feelings. Well, what is she feeling? Is she like it? Is she put off by it? How does it affect her inside? Not just outside, inside, in her head.
Yeah, it sounds like that emotional connection and the characterization is something that we can all agree is an essential element to a scene. So I am going to take a question from our Q&A panel. Here's a good one. How do you decide what sort of sex your characters will have? And you can interpret sort of sex however you wish. Why don't we start with Meghan?
I mean, it all has to do with their personalities and what I think they're up for, what they're going to be interested in. I mean, I write very different sex in like Battle Scars than I do in The Night Off. And it all has to do with the characters and their life experiences, I guess, and what's brought them to this point. And everybody gets off about different things. And so, I mean, really, I just have a very good idea about the character in my head, who they are, and what kind of sex they probably like follows from that.
Kris, do you want to jump in?
No, I agree with Meghan. It's your characters really define what kind of sex they're going to have. I can't put, virgin-esque type women in a story and have them whip and spank one another right away. It has to, you know, it has to be consensual, and it has to start off, you know, kind of, you have to understand boundaries, and your characters will tell you what works in their situation and what doesn't. You know, I just couldn't put characters in a sex scene just because I needed to write a sex scene. It has to, you know, like everybody had already mentioned about moving the plot forward. And so I think that the sex has to just kind of fit the characters, without a doubt.
Does anyone else have a different answer, or are we all in consensus about that one?
I agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Okay. All right. Renee Roman would like to know, what was the hardest sex scene to write? Anne.
Honestly, none of them. I enjoy writing the sex scenes. I sometimes end up writing those and setting them aside in advance. If I know the characters are going to hit that point, and then kind of picking it back up, and I may change some things around in the storyline or in the scene to kind of fit where I put it in the storyline. But they're not, the ones that I wrote in my current book were not difficult to write. Yeah.
What about you, Nan?
I don't think I've ever had problems writing a sex scene. Just take your characters and put them together and let them work it out.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. I mean, you know your characters, and they know each other, and they know themselves.
Anybody have had one that's difficult? I chose the wrong people. Okay, what about you, Vic?
I think when I wrote Chosen, that was one of my most difficult ones, because the characters were in a situation where sex wasn't a thing. It was all about survival, and it was all about moving forward and getting to the end of the story. And so sex had to wait until it felt right. And that was really, really late in the story. And even then, it had to be right for the plot and the moment, and the emotional impact had to be really, really strong. And it was difficult to do.
Kris?
In Listen, my main character in Listen, she's a virgin. So when she kind of starts making out with her love interest, I had to try to remember what it was like, you know, the first time, and, you know, what you're willing to do and what you do the first time. I mean, you can't jump right in. I made it realistic. I made it not like a perfect sex scene and everything worked great, and she came when she was supposed to, and she came when she was supposed to. It was more of a realistic thing. Like, okay, this is really going to happen, and my character wasn't comfortable doing certain things that later she was. But writing that first scene, just trying to be realistic with the character. You know, she suffers from anxiety. And so I also had to kind of put that into play too. And so it was a hard scene to write. And I tried to write it realistically. And that's hard, because I like to write the fluffy, everything is perfect romance, and the sex scenes and great. And so that one was a little bit real for me.
It's tough. All right, I have a question directed at Meghan O'Brien. From Amelia Faith Ryan. I adored Battle Scars. Is there any way you would write another one like it?
Oh, yeah, I mean, definitely. I really like that book too, and I like the fact that they are a little slower to get to the sex part than most of my characters. It's a little new for me. I usually introduce sex within the first quarter, if not on the first page of a novel. So it was kind of fun to have that contemporary romance sort of build up. And also sex that's, you know, maybe a little more difficult for the characters to fall into initially. So yeah, I mean, I enjoy writing the fast burn and the relatively slower burn. Not too slow of a burn.
And I have a similar one for Kris Bryant from Amelia as well. Will there be another Brit writer book? And if yes, when?
Yes, there will be. And I think after I finish up Scent from the Sensory series, I'm going to write a full-length Brit writer erotica, I think.
We're so excited.
So it'll be probably next summer. It'll come out next summer.
All right, there you go. Some heat just in time for summer. All right, this one is for Victoria from LL Shelton. How hard was it to make it through edits on Silk and Leather? The stories were hot from beginning to end. So why don't we interpret that question broadly? And you can, talk about perhaps how you chose the stories, what that was like for you editing an anthology.
I love erotica anthologies. I think they're just fabulous. And I was really, really excited to be able to choose the stories for this one. And we had so many amazing entries. Really, it was hard to narrow down to just kind of the ones that we chose. And I think one of the great things about it was the variety that came in. Because I think one of the difficulties with anthologies is choosing enough different stories that they kind of appeal to a whole variety of people. And particularly when you're dealing with a theme like Silk and Leather, which is edgy kind of stuff, you tend to get a lot of one type of story, like a lot of BDSM stories. But it was nice to get so many others too. And I was so excited when I got to read them all. And there were some that didn't make the cut that were also really exceptional. So yeah, I think it's a really hot anthology. I think we've already mentioned the emotional connections, and I think there's a lot of emotional connection all the way through it, which is what separates erotica from porn, right? It's the emotion, not just the mechanics. So yeah, it was a lot of fun to edit. The writing quality was really, really strong, and the stories are just fabulous.
They are. All right, I have one for Nan. Where in the book do you usually include your sex scenes? Are they, do you have them all the way through or mostly towards the end?
It depends on the story. There are some that, right from the very beginning, right from the first page. There are some that never get to the sex scene. Go out the whole thing and end up in the bedroom, but that's it. You don't see the sex. It just has to be how they react to each other. Do they start out really hot for each other, or they have to really work up to it? So it's story to story.
And do you make those decisions like in advance, or do they just like happen organically as you write?
I guess happening organically. I have my characters and they start talking to each other, and if they say, let's do it, they do it.
As you should. And so you wrote a book that's kind of like 3 novellas linked together. And all your characters, yep, there it is. It's an excellent book, Femme Tales. So how much thought did you put into making your sex scenes different from other characters' sex scenes in the same book?
Well, with Beast, the first one, it had to be more, I won't say carnal, but more of a physical reaction than emotional. Emotion came later, the physical came first. Emotion came later, kind of built up over time. And with the second one, Awakened, because they really didn't, the character's in a coma, so you couldn't have sex. That it had to be something that happened at the end of the story, but it had to be a little softer because it was brand new. And then in the last one, Stiletto, it was kind of a combination of both. It was kind of hot and new. So because it was each type of sex scene was based on the story itself and the characters themselves and how the story built up around the characters and when they finally did get together. So because each story was different, the sex scene had to be different as well. So.
Yeah. All right, so we have a question. Is there anything that you will not put in a sex scene?
Oh.
You can pass if you like.
Certainly, there's a lot of crazy things out there I would not put in a sex scene. You know, but I guess the most important is I would never put like, you know, actual non-consent between the main characters in a sex scene. I've read that in certain novels, and I don't like it. You know, I like the fantasy of it when it's very consensual and everybody knows what's going on. But when I've read romances in the past where somebody just, you know, goes a little bit over the line, I can't ever pull back from that and get on that person's side again. So that's something that I'll never play with for sure.
Yeah. Kris?
Agreed. Non-consensual sex. And I've read a couple things that made me cringe, using certain devices, not necessarily made for sex. Somebody, I don't even want to get into it, but certain things make me uncomfortable. I gotta go with Meghan on that. That's pretty much it for me.
Vic?
I mean, as said, consent. I think as an editor, I'm particularly weird about the words that we use to describe certain things, and I'm very aware of how many hands or legs are involved, and the way that you describe things. Like, do we need to know about the, you know, indentation from the panty line that because the pants were too tight? You know, I mean, like, do you need to know that? So I think as an editor, I'm just a little bit hyper aware of how things are described.
Alrighty. So we have another question. Do you feel that you have to write sex scenes? Do you think sex scenes are a reader expectation or a publisher expectation? Ooh, there's lots of nodding going on. All right, I'm going to hand it to someone who's not nodding. Anne, what do you think? Is sex an expectation?
Well, I was nodding. It was just subtle.
Okay.
I think yes. Well, especially if you're doing erotica, yes, it's an expectation. But even in general romances, it's an expectation. Whether the characters wait until they're married, wait until they're in an actual relationship, it depends on that. But I think it is in the romance. That's a major part of it. At least readers are expecting that.
Are we all in agreement that it's an expectation? Anyone have a differing opinion? Alrighty.
Well, I mean, I think expectation, yes. I've been on a lot of discussions, and we've done panels in the past where fade to black versus going all in. And I think just some writers are known for writing sex and some aren't. Some people like the fade to black, and some readers love it. Some readers, you know, love every detail of sex. And like my argument or where I stand on this is that in real life, you know, I can't fade to black. I don't want to fade to black. I want the sex. I want to write about it. I want other people to read it. I want to enjoy it. I want other people to enjoy it. So I think it's very important. I'm always going to write sex and everything. I think I've only written maybe 1 or 2 fade to black scenes, just because I think it is important. I think people want to read it. As I mentioned earlier, when I was younger, and even now when I read things, I want to be able to feel it. And I always love that feeling. I love that I'm reading about people who are having sex, you know, and it's just a great feeling. And I can't imagine, you know, fade to black. Or I remember Sandy was saying, and then they kissed. So, you know, it's one of those deals. I feel it's important. I feel that's what readers want. And I think that there are some writers who will give it to them and some who won't. I will always have sex in my books.
I'll just jump in from a publisher point of view. We don't make any writers write sex. So right. If you don't want to, that's absolutely okay. All righty. Oh, here's a good one. Is there any sexual premise you have not yet explored, but you would like to in the future? What about you, Nan? Anything you haven't explored, but you would like to?
Do you mean me physically or writing?
No, as a writer in your books, any kind of scene that you haven't written that you would like to?
No, I think know. I really can't tell you.
Okay.
I've written a lot, but I don't know if there's any others that I would really like to.
Well, that's a good place to be. If you can write everything that appeals to you, that's great. What about you, Meghan?
I think I've done a lot of, yeah, I've written a lot. And I think at this point, I've probably approached the line of where I'm comfortable and what I find hot. And I can't really think of anything that I haven't written about that I would still find appealing. So anything could happen, but I mean, I've taken it pretty far to the edge already. So,
anybody have a scene that they want to write but haven't?
Writer will probably do a 3-step, I think, and I haven't done that yet, so I think it'll be kind of interesting because I write such emotional sex that it's going to be a challenge to see how well I do it. Just sex being lustful and just pleasure, and so I'm kind of excited, a little nervous to write it, but it'll be interesting.
With Kris on that one, that's a scene I'm actually possibly interested in writing, but haven't gotten the nerve to do it yet.
Alrighty. Okay. Nan, I know you write a lot of different kinds of sex scenes. Do you prefer to write BDSM or the more erotic romances? You write BDSM really well. This is how it actually is as a lifestyle. Is that hard to research?
Well, I have a lot of research because I started in the kink community when I was very young. So I grew up with it. So I know a lot about it. Not everything, but a lot about it. I have to hold myself back sometimes for writing it so that I don't go too far. There are some characters that just will never do it. And so then I have to do the nice vanilla scenes. So I lost my train of thought here.
So the question is the BDSM scenes hard to research?
Not for me, because I lived in that lifestyle for a while.
Yeah.
So like I said, I don't know everything about it, but quite a bit. I maybe 20 years in the BDSM world.
Well, that sounds like enough research for me. Vic, here's one for you. Is it easier to write sex scenes as contemporary works or in fantasy works?
Easier is an interesting word there. I'm not sure. I don't know. It's fun. I mean, obviously fantasy gives you a little bit more leeway when you're dealing with different types of creatures and different situations and worlds and all that. But I think the mechanics are kind of the same and the emotions are the same, whether they're on this planet or in a fairy tale world or on the back of a boat with a vampire, or just in a club up against a wall. I think sex is sex and it's more about the emotions. So I'm not sure it's easier or harder. It's just the setting that's different.
Do you have one you prefer, or you like to switch it up?
I like fantasy worlds. I like sci-fi. I like dystopian worlds. So I think for me it adds an extra element of rawness, like the Furies who have their wings and fangs. Like there's something kind of weirdly hot about having somebody who could probably tear your throat out. I don't know. The danger element. That probably says way too much about me. Yeah. But so I like the fantasy sex. Yeah.
Okay, Anne, how do you know, or what do you do if a sex scene isn't working? Have you ever written something, got halfway through and had to redo it or scrap it, or how do you decide if a scene is working, and how do you fix it if it isn't?
If it's working, if it's not working and it's not getting me hot writing it, then it's scrapped. But if I'm writing it, as I'm writing it, I'm starting to feel it as well, then I know it's a good scene. There have been plenty I have scrapped because it's just been either too mechanical, kind of, or it hasn't been, I don't know, it just hasn't been, the heat hasn't been there. So yeah, I will scrap it and start it over again, even if I have to take a break from it and walk away just to come back to it later. But yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Kris?
I love writing sex. I look forward to it. I get so excited. I don't think I've ever not been happy with a scene that I've written. It's something I really, I count down. Okay, just after this chapter, then on their date, they're going to have sex. So I look forward to it. I enjoy writing it. So I don't know that I've deleted a whole lot out of a scene before, just because it is such a pleasurable thing for me to write. I really enjoy it. So I don't delete a lot of what I write.
Well, here's one for Meghan. Someone who's written so many scenes and I think would be considered a pro in the author field. How do you incorporate consent into your sex scenes without kind of hitting the reader over the head with it?
Well, like I said, I like dialogue in sex scenes, so that usually makes consent a lot easier to express. A lot of my characters talk about the sex they're going to have before they have it, and that obviously really, everybody's into this. So I'll have them, have verbal check-ins kind of throughout. At some point I might stop the verbal check-ins, and then it's more just looks, pauses, nods. Nonverbal consent, a little deeper into the scene can be good. But I mean, generally, my characters usually have pretty good communication before they get into bed in some way or the other. I mean, even if they've just met, like in the night off, Emily has laid out all of her boundaries and all of what she wants anyways. So they kind of have that framework to begin with. But yeah, I always have some kind of check-in during the scene, if it's verbal or nonverbal.
Anybody else have any tips or tricks for incorporating consent?
I pretty much do the same thing Meghan does. The character will kind of tease and within the foreplay and kind of, I tend to use not the same phrases all the time, but tell me you want me, tell me you want this, or they'll kind of make the person beg for it. So that's the consent that in my area.
Make them beg for it. I like that.
It's a lot of please, a lot of teasing, a lot of anticipation, and then the character at that point is like, okay, will you just please do it because you're driving me crazy. So.
All right, I have a question. I'm going to call her out because this is a funny question from D. Jackson Lee. Have you ever gotten inappropriate emails, and I am going to add here, or hit on, from readers because of the nature of your writing? Kris, Bryant, I feel like you must have. Come on.
No, not at all. Not at all. Either that or they're all blocked. I don't know. Either my Facebook has blocked everything, but no, not at all. No. Everybody just like, oh, you're just so cute. Oh, you're so sweet. So yeah, nothing. No.
Okay. Anyone got a story?
I mean,
we had something happen to me. It slid into my DM on Instagram and was telling me how pretty I was, and they just wanted to talk to me and looking at my pictures, keeping them going every day. They're supposedly in Syria or something, and they have a rough job, and I'm like, I had to finally just block the person because it was getting weird.
Just one time, 20 years ago, and we're still together. So I don't know.
Worked out.
Yeah, I've gotten a few. I mean,
come on, Meghan O'Brien.
I've gotten some very interesting pictures. I've gotten some very interesting propositions. I've gotten pseudo-stalkers. I mean, and some of them were earlier, some of them are more recently. It's interesting, for sure. I always am quick to say I'm married.
It's a good answer. All right, let's pick one of my questions. All right, how does sex in romance differ from sex in erotica? And I feel like Kris would probably have a really good take on this. As someone
I would think so, but not really.
You want to pass?
It's a tough one for me. I think writing erotica is, I approach it more lustfully than love, as opposed to, like romance is more love for me and erotica is more lust. So not to say that there isn't, lust in love. It's just, I'm struggling with realizing the difference between the two. I know that Sandy and I have talked about it before, just because I can't quite figure out like how to not have emotions and then at the very last minute put it in. So put the emotions in. That's clear. Put the emotion in. I don't have the greatest answer for that.
Yeah. What about you, Meghan?
I do have an answer for that. I think that in romance, sex is what you're building toward, and in erotica, sex is what you're building upon. In romance, it's not the beginning thing. That's not what brings them together. It's sort of like the end result of them getting to know each other enough to get to that step. And in erotica, it's, this initial passion brings us together. And then from there, we're figuring out the emotions that come from that.
It's a really good answer. Where does erotic romance fit in that then?
I think that is the building upon. If it's just sex, you're not really building upon much. You're just getting off and going home. But, if it's erotic romance, you're having the sex, and then that is leading to some kind of emotional connection that you have to build upon to actually get to the point of being in love.
I don't know if anyone really wants to follow Meghan in that answer, but if you're brave. No? Okay.
I think for me, there's an element of immediacy to it. Mm-hmm. So erotica is very much immediate. It's this right here, right now, and it's really focused. Whereas kind of romance takes a more meandering kind of path. It's a little bit more winding and gentle, whereas erotica is very much kind of right here, right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, romance is the slow burn. And erotica is like immediately just explosive heat, leading to the love.
Erotica is like going to a play party. Everybody knows why you're there. You're there to have sex. Where romance is, why am I here? Do you really want me to be here? Do I want to be here? Yeah, all those emotions running around inside.
Alrighty, we're going to take a quick break for a little advertisement. Bold Strokes Books has a flash sale going on for now until 8 o'clock tonight. 15% off all lesbian erotica. And the link for that is in the chat roll. The coupon code is HEAT, which is all caps. So if you want to grab some of these guys' books, 15% off. All right, here's an oldie but a goodie. How do you keep your sex scenes fresh? Let's start with you, Nan. I know you've written a whole bunch of them. How do you keep them fresh?
Just trying new things. Looking at what you did before and how you can improve it. A little bit turn of a hand, a little bit turn of a whatever. Just improving on last time. What didn't work, what didn't feel good, what felt wonderful, what you want to do again, like that.
Okay. What about you, Kris?
I think my characters are so different, so I think their sex is always going to be different. Whether, they're both kind of players or they're not. I just think that every character I write, the two characters always bring something different to the bedroom or wherever they are. So I don't think I have a problem with coming up with different types of sex or keeping it fresh, just because the characters are also different, the ones that I write. So it's not really a stumbling block.
Yeah. Megan, how do you keep it fresh?
I mean, I've obviously written about the same actual acts many times, but I mean, every individual character and couple are just going to have different chemistry and dynamics. And I would like to think that that alone is going to keep it fresh. I mean, there's only so many things you can do in bed, I guess. And so it's the personalities and the emotions underlying it that really keeps it fresh.
Cool. Vic?
Yeah, and I think it has a lot to do with your plot as well. Particularly for me, it's very, very much revolves around the plot that's involved. Like I say, for Chosen, the sex had to be right, and it had to be in the right time because of what was going on. But for, the Furies books, it was all about building up to the sex and enjoying it when it came, so to speak. So, it's very plot driven for me.
Anne?
It depends on the characters. I think because each relationship is different in each story. So because the characters are new, then the sex will be fresh and new. That's basically it for me.
Okay, we have a couple of minutes left. So we're going to do a quick round robin. Let's hear about your latest book and give us a heat rating and adventurousness rating on the sex scene in your most recent book. Kris.
Most recent as an out now? Most recent?
Yes, the one that's out, the one that readers can go buy.
Okay, the ones that Temptation, without a doubt. Heat on a scale from 1 to 5. Are we doing the pepper scale?
Yeah, peppers.
1 to 5, I'm going to give it a 5. It's about a nanny and her very rich boss. So there's a lot of tropes in this one. It covers rich, poor, employer, employee. It's got a lot of heat in it. So I took it pretty far. I figured, well, the cover is pretty sexual, and so I decided, the story is going to have a lot of sex in it. So
it is. I saw that cover and was like, Kris Bryant.
I know.
What? This should have a Brit writer's name on it.
I know. I was surprised too.
Meghan O'Brien, your latest book and heat rating and adventurousness.
Well, unfortunately, my latest book is The Sex Therapist Next Door. As far as heat rating,
4 billion.
Be prepared for sex almost every other chapter. That was the most sex I've ever written in one book, and it was definitely at times felt a little overambitious. But so yeah, pretty off the charts. Make sure you're very comfortable reading sex before you pick that one up.
And what about you?
My current book is Femme Tales, and I guess the heat rating would be, I'm going to say 4, only because it's 3 different stories, and the sex ranges, there's different ranges in each story. And what was the other one? So it's
how adventurous is the sex?
It's not very adventurous. It's not very adventurous. It's more erotic romance than it is erotica.
Okay. Cool. So that's Femme Tales, in case anyone missed that title.
Let me actually it.
And there is the amazing cover. Victoria, why don't you tell us about the anthology?
Yes, so Silk and Leather just came out, and it's very adventurous and very hot and very sexy, and it's got stories about, obviously we've got some BDSM stories in there, and some really emotional ones, and some very dirty ones, and some stories that are very about kind of refinding your sexuality, which is really lovely. And we've got a virginal scene, which I think Sandy might be familiar with.
Who wrote that? Collection? What?
Yeah, and kind of first timer jitters. That's a lot of fun as well as being really sexy. And we've got stories about kind of having to deal with the in-laws and very fabulously sexy ways of getting around that. So lots of different stories that are all really hot.
Awesome. All right, super quick because we are running out of time. Nan, tell us about your most recent book, the one readers can buy now.
That would be the name of it.
That's In Helen's Hands?
In Helen's Hands. Yeah, it's about a young musician who gets a job with the woman that she admires most in the world. She wants to be just like her. And find out this woman is not what she thought it was. And they embark in a relationship. And yes, there is sex on every page. So it's a 5.
Yeah,
Yep.
5 chili peppers for that one.
Yep.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. It's such a good time. Thank you to everyone who showed up and to all our panelists. Enjoy the rest of the Bookathon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.